Well, hey everybody, it's Marcus coming at you here from Foundations Loveland, and this feels a little bit different, and we want to let you know why it feels a little bit different today. A little bit earlier in the week, sadly, one of my friends who I was hanging out with came down with COVID, and so just out of an abundance of caution, we're videoing this to be able to show you, and the reason we're doing that is because we care about you. We want to remove any risk whatsoever of anybody else getting sick, so that's why we're doing this. Thanks for your flexibility. I also want to shout out to our team that's done a fantastic job of flexing in a strange moment like this, and also ask you to continue to be praying for those who are wrestling with this. It's all of us in a lot of ways, but please be praying for those that are wrestling with this COVID situation. It's been a tough season, and we're all in this together. I also want to say one last thing by way of setup before we dive into our message, and that is, those of you who are watching online, you could probably give us a master class on this. You know what I'm about to share, but I want to encourage you, wherever you're watching this from, how do you handle a teaching over a screen? Best way to do it is just to engage, okay? Imagine that I'm right there in the room with you. And what that means is you can laugh out loud if you want to, hopefully with me, not at me. You can cheer if you want to. You can shout amen. Those of you at home, you might even be able to press kind of pause and just kind of jump into a question that you have with one another. But I want to encourage you, engage. However you do it, engage, and that'll make the most of our time together. Okay, so these last few weeks, as we've been drawing closer to Easter, we've been exploring the book of Esther in this series called, Where's God in All This? Remember, where's God in all this is a question that, if asked well, whether you're looking for God's favor, as Pastor Carl was teaching us right out of the gate, whether you're looking to thrive through chaos, whether you're looking for God's hands, this question, if you ask it well, will throw you into a quest. Because just like a tool, there's a right way to use a tool and a wrong way to use a tool. This question is the same. There's a healthy way to ask this question and an unhealthy way to ask this question. You can ask it out of fear and despair, or you can ask it out of faith and discovery. We want to encourage you. Ask it often, but ask it well. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes, let me give you a quick trailer of this story, kind of like a movie trailer. 2,500 years ago, there's a Jewish guy named Mordecai, and he adopts his orphan cousin named Esther. And they live in the Persian Empire after being taken into captivity from Jerusalem. And while they're there, King Xerxes holds a kingdom-wide beauty pageant to pick a pretty new queen. Now, why is he holding this beauty pageant to pick a pretty new queen? Well, because of something that happened to his old queen. In chapter 1, if you've read the story and you're familiar with it, in the middle of this 6-month plus party that King Xerxes is throwing for his kingdom and officials, he asks his queen, then her name was Vashti, he asks his old queen, Queen Vashti, to come out in front of all of his friends, and she's wearing a crown. Now, most biblical scholars believe that that's all she was wearing. And so she refuses. She's like, I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous. There's no way I'm going to do that. And so that's why he's in this process of finding a new queen. And this is where Esther comes in. And Esther is a breathtakingly beautiful young Jewish woman. And she wins this pageant and she becomes queen. And she gets positioned in a place of immense influence in the Persian palace, a superpower of the day. But the plot thickens when, and this is where we left off last week, when the prime minister in the king's court, a dude named Haman, who's just this total egomaniac, Haman is offended that this Jewish guy named Mordecai, Esther's uncle, won't bow down to him at the city gates. And so Haman tricks King Xerxes into calling for the genocide of the Jewish people throughout his entire kingdom. And guys, there is no weapon of mass destruction like a grudge. We'll do a whole series on that. But when Haman and the king don't know, what they don't know is that Esther actually is Jewish. So Mordecai hears about this plot, and he sends word to Esther to kind of alert her to it, and he pleads with her. He says, hey, we need you. We need you in this moment to jump into this situation. And he actually asks the question, hey, I don't know, what if you have been put in this royal position for such a time as this? He asks this question. And so Esther says, okay, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Guys, is this gal like straight fire or what? I mean, what a woman. She shows this courageous conviction to rise to the challenge. And this is when Esther shows her real beauty, her drop-dead gorgeous internal beauty, her character. This is Esther's defining moment, and she realizes that it is, and so she seizes it, and she's shouting, "Use me, God," because she wants to be used. So she's driving this faith stake deep into the ground, no matter what happens. She models here what it means to die to ourselves, to put it all on the line for God and for others. I mean, what an incredible woman. And then chapter 5 comes along. And the time comes for her to come before the king. But remember, this is against the law. In fact, there's an ancient historian, Josephus, and he wrote this. Check it out. The king made a law that none of his own people should approach him when he sat upon his throne unless they were called. See that? Unless they were called. And men with axes in their hands literally stood around the king's throne in order to punish those that approached him without being called. This is history. And so Esther, she risks everything in doing this. This is hugely dangerous. This is a mega risk. And guys, I absolutely just have to call a quick time out and quickly point out here a clear difference between the court of this king, King Xerxes, and our king, the King of Kings, King Jesus. If you want an audience with our king, you don't need an appointment. And you can keep your head. How awesome is that? Jesus dares us to get in there. Look what it says in Scripture. In him, talking about Jesus, and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence. So let us boldly come to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So you don't have to timidly tiptoe into Jesus' throne room. You can just boldly bust in, and you can confidently ask whatever is on your mind, whatever is on your heart. Why? Because our king is not fearful or self-protective. Because our king is infinitely good. Because our king is infinitely powerful, and best of all, our king loves you as his own child once you've trusted in him. But Esther knocks on the door of King Xerxes' throne room. Very, very different. And this was Esther's finest moment. It wasn't winning the Miss Universe pageant. It wasn't becoming queen. Her finest hour was knocking on the throne room door when it meant almost sure death. Her finest hour was risking her one and only life for her people, being willing to sacrifice herself for others. She says, "If I perish, I perish." She knew what we've shared before a couple weeks ago. There's no safe way to be great. There's also no great way to be safe. So the door opens. Try to imagine it. The door opens. The king sees her. And Esther's heart is just beating out of her chest. And the guards, they clench their axes as Esther approaches the king. But then he waves them off. And she makes this amazing request for him to be her guest at a party. Just the king and Haman. Actually, 2 for 2 nights in a row. Now, these banquets or these parties aren't a delay tactic. I don't know if you've ever read this before and said, I wonder why she did this. She's not stalling until she gets a flash of heavenly insight. She's actually using a genius negotiation tactic called the setup. She is patiently and brilliantly persuading the king. There's a guy named Dr. Robert Cialdini. He's an expert on the psychology of influence, and he wrote a book around this idea of persuasion. And in it, he reveals this compelling research showing how the most effective persuaders are the most effective persuaders. People who know how to handle the moments just before the ask to best influence and prepare somebody to be receptive to your request, to respond favorably to your appeal. And Esther, she's modeling this here with these parties. King Xerxes made partying an extreme sport. Remember, we talked about this before. She knows her king. She knows her king's a party animal if there ever was one. He had memorized every line of the Hangover movie trilogy. He was the last person to leave every rave. He had tons of tattoos that he had no idea how they got there. So she is speaking his love language right now. And in so doing, she's commanding his attention, which so often is fragmented with his royal responsibilities or being drunk. And so she's capturing his attention to attend to her issue. She's priming the king. She's persuading him to be persuaded to her request. She's so wise and so shrewd, Esther is. But then, between the first and the second party, the morning of the second day, Haman is bragging about how amazing he is because he's talking to his friends and family like, nobody else got invited to be a part of this banquet except the king and me. But he's also bemoaning the fact that this Jewish guy, Mordecai, still won't bow down to him at the city gates. So here's what it says. Chapter 5. So his wife Zeresh and all of his friends said to him, have a gallows built 75 feet high. Think about that. And ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hung on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. And then this is hilarious. This suggestion delighted Haman. And he had the gallows built. Now, some people in their backyard will build swing sets, okay? Haman, on the other hand, what does he do? He builds a gallows. How tall? You remember? Say it if you remember. He builds this gallows 75 feet tall. This is just so Haman. Because what does he do? This guy can't do anything halfway. This guy's hatred has all consumed him, and this is just a little, pardon the pun, a little overkill, isn't it? To have this gigantic hangman gallows, this super gallows, let's call it, built. And the idea is, again, this is 75 feet tall. It's almost 8 stories tall. Think about that, guys. And so he's got this gallows built, and he wants to hang Mordecai on it. Poor little Mordecai. It probably isn't even to scale because it's so much taller than this. Haman does this thing. He builds this super gallows because he's got this super hatred for Mordecai, and he wants to kill him. But Haman's egomaniac hunger for power and hang your enemy's hatred, it's going to boomerang, guys. We're going to see that. It always does, friends. And it's almost hard to watch, but the story of Haman's existence is not much more than a warning. Beware of a ravenous appetite for more power, more wealth, more control, more praise, more honor. It's a highway to your own hanging. This is the unavoidable trajectory of life outside the rule of God. When all you live for is more is never enough. And your very soul gets cannibalized by your own hunger. But that evening, King Xerxes, he can't sleep. This is chapter 6 now. And so he does the next best thing to take an Ambien. He actually has the King's Chronicles, which is a book about himself, read to him by his servants. And so he's sitting back just kind of listening to this story about himself, trying to get drowsy. But while they're reading, something exciting and kind of dramatic happens in the plot of this book. He's reminded of a time when there was an assassination plot against him, but that plot got foiled because of somebody else who found out about it and reported it to the king's guard. And who saved the king's life? Yeah, you guessed it, Mordecai. And so Xerxes says, hey, what did we ever do for that guy that saved my life? And his servants say, nothing. He goes, really? Who's in my court right now? And guys, this is just hilarious. This is so funny. He sees Haman coming, right, in his court, and he kind of calls him close. Haman comes a little closer, and he's like, guards, get him, take his... Nah, just messing with you, Haman. Come here, buddy. How you doing? You doing all right? You're looking good? You feel good? Because you're looking good. How's things going? I was just playing with you. I'm sorry, but hey, I got a question for you, okay? Why don't you think about this a little bit? What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And Haman is assuming that it's himself. And so he recommends how to best honor this special person. And so he says, King, I'll tell you what you do. You get a royal robe that you yourself have worn. I like that one blue one that you got. And I would also say, get a horse that you've ridden, maybe your favorite horse. And then get a prince and have him lead this man in that robe, on that horse, through the city, and have everybody bow down and say, look, this is what's going to happen to the person that the king loves to honor. And so he's imagining all this. Haman is fantasizing about it, but imagine his shock when the king commands him to do every bit of that for Mordecai. Ha! I mean, this is probably a good time to tell you that Mordecai is actually Hebrew for LOL, okay? So this is Shakespearean, guys. Actually, it's better than that. I'm convinced it's what Shakespeare would call biblical, okay? So then the second banquet comes. Let's keep getting back in the story. Esther makes her bold move. At the first banquet, Xerxes says, what is your request, my love? Just name it, up to half of my kingdom. And she says, come back tomorrow night. That's my best Esther impersonation, sorry. And then the king, in response to that, says, okay, right? Because he's King Xerxes, and his name is actually Hebrew for pig, okay? So he just can't control his appetites. And when Esther says this, he's like, I'm coming back, man, if you're throwing another banquet and you're going to be here. But now let's jump to chapter 7. With the king properly prepared, she reveals her real request, okay? The second banquet. She takes this mega risk and she asks, my king, someone is trying to kill me. Would you please spare me and my people, please? And when Xerxes hears this, he's furious and he's so shocked. He's like, who is it? And Esther says, remember, who else is sitting at the table? She just points right over to him and she says, this vile Haman. And Xerxes just throws into a rage, man. He's furious. He's walking around flipping stuff. He's walking out on the veranda, on the balcony. He's just so angry. And while this is going on, while the king is like trying to catch his cool, Haman goes into a flat out panic, like the blood drains from his face. And so he starts begging Esther, please talk to him about sparing my life. Apparently, Esther is laying on a couch or something while all this is starting to unfold. And Haman is getting a little too excited. He gets closer and closer to her, and he actually falls onto the couch, onto Esther, while he's pleading his case. As that happens, King Xerxes comes back in from the balcony and sees Haman on the couch with Esther. And check this out. He's like, this guy is dead. That's it. Get him out of here. And look at this verse. As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face, put a bag over his head. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, hey, it's actually a gallows 75 feet high that stands in Haman's own backyard. See, he made it for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And the king said, hang him on it. Hang him on it then. Let's do this. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Now we're going to come back to that. But then with poetic justice, Xerxes gives Haman's estate to Esther. Xerxes promotes Mordecai to be his new chief of staff, second in command only to the king in the whole empire. He gives him honor and riches. He has him write the king's new edict to overturn the previous edict, protecting the Jews from their enemies and demanding that they be shown respect. Now, listen to Mordecai's legacy from chapter 10, verse 3. It's the last verse in the whole book of Esther. Just kind of close your eyes and listen to this. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because, why? Because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. And that's how the story of Esther finishes. Just roll credits right there. So where's God in all this? Actually, Esther is the only book of the Bible, besides the Song of Solomon, where God is not mentioned, as we shared before. And that's not just weird trivia, guys. It's wonderful because it's not an accident. And it illustrates a powerful principle few of us ever metabolize. We want you to realize something, and we want you to metabolize something. We want you to know something, but we want you to know something. And here's this principle. While he sometimes may be silent, he's never absent. He's always present. While God sometimes may be silent, he's never absent. He's always present. He's always there. God's name is nowhere to be found in the whole story of Esther, but he's there. God may not be mentioned, but he's moving. He's in the story. He's behind every scene. He's in the middle of every messy moment, from the captivity to the coronation, from the beauty pageant to the palace, from the bedroom to the throne room, from the gates to the gallows, from raucous parties to whispered plots. He's there. And on the surface, in Esther's story, it might have looked like she and her people were all alone. I mean, think about it. They're in exile. They're far from home. No hope of return. They're under foreign domination with alien cultural practices, with a king whose subtle shifts in mood were the difference between joy or genocide. But Esther knew that just because God was silent didn't mean he wasn't present. And when forced to face the enormous power of King Xerxes, power of the Persian Empire, the superpower at the time, Esther never forgot who the real king was. Esther knew who and whose she was. She was a Jew. She was a child of the real king. And Esther knew that she was never alone. Never. And friend, you are never alone either. And we just want to say to you, if you haven't trusted in him yet, he's been waiting to do life with you. He's been standing outside the throne room of your life, and he's been waiting for you to let him in. But if you do decide to trust Jesus, to forgive your sin and to give you new life, let me encourage you, just don't expect a genie to pop out of a lantern in a puff of smoke to grant your every wish. Because on this side of heaven, it seems that our King's MO is more that of a gentle presence and quiet power, lovingly orchestrating details toward a greater end, his end, which is always for our good. But never confuse his silence for his absence. God's style has never involved a press agent. Think about this. God's style has never involved a press agent, a marketing plan, sound bites, or catchy jingles. Like, I am Yahweh, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. That's not what he does. But listen, even if he's not mentioned, he's moving. Even if you don't see him, he's there. Even if you don't sense him, he's there. Even when you're confused, he's there. Even when you're doubting, he's there. And when you don't feel his presence, he's there. And when you're asking the question, you're wondering, where's God in all this? He's there. Because while he sometimes may be silent, he's never absent. He's always present. And that is the core of Esther's story. So let's finish up together. Why camp out in Esther before Easter? Because it's a life and death story of love versus hate, of good versus evil, of God versus the adversary. And there's this awesome foreshadowing in Esther that's no accident, it's no coincidence. Esther shows us a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the ongoing battle between the purposes of God and the purposes of Satan, especially against God's people who would produce Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So please realize this. Think about this carefully. So important. This will 10x the meaning of this message and this truth. If you can not just realize this, but metabolize it, okay? Just really know it. Realize this. If Haman succeeds in destroying the Jews, Satan succeeds in destroying the Messiah. Because Jesus' incarnate existence cannot happen without the Jews' existence. So this isn't just another news story of genocide. It's the whole story of redemptive history at stake. But the enemy's plans go down in flames of failure with Esther and with Jesus. And how they feel, how they fall, how they fail is this beautifully fantastic flip that you just got to see. In Esther, through an only God, holy twist of events, Haman gets hanged using the very gallows that he built and intended to use to destroy Mordecai. And so, chapter 9, verse 1, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, what happened? The reverse occurred. Let me hear you say, wherever you are, the reverse occurred. The reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. I just love that phrase, the reverse occurred. And what's true about Esther, guys, is true about Easter. Just as Haman gets hanged on the gallows that he built for Mordecai, so Satan gets crushed on the cross that he created for Jesus. So think about this. The cross, when it happened, when Jesus was crucified, just like we got a super gallows, we got like a super cross too, this huge cross, right? Where Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, is hung on a cross with nails, practically naked, almost having bled to death already, but then they build this cross for him because they can't stand him. So nobody understood when this happened, when the crucifixion happened, that what was happening was something that was for good. Everybody thought Jesus is just being condemned because he was being condemned. And so they hung Jesus on the cross, and there he lies, and there he dies. And everybody around him realized what was happening. That Jesus was being killed because of who he said he was. And Satan delighted when Jesus was killed on the cross. Because Satan intended to use the cross to defeat and to destroy the Messiah. He thought, if I could just kill him, I could take care of God's plan. But in a holy twist, there's this grand reversal, and God turns the tables, and the reverse occurred. And Jesus Christ used the cross to defeat our enemies of sin and death and to gain victory for himself and for us as his people. He used the cross to reverse the curse. Wow. He traded our brokenness for his righteousness and our death for his extraordinary life. That's why Paul wrote this. Take a look at it. You just actually have to even see it. When you were stuck in your old sin-dead life, he writes, you were incapable of responding to God. God brought you alive, right along with Christ. Think of it. All sins forgiven. The slate wiped clean. Your old arrest warrant canceled and nailed to the Christ's cross. He stripped all the spiritual tyrants in the universe of their sham authority at the cross, and he marched them naked through the streets. Colossians 2. Wow. Guys, on the cross, listen to this. Jesus used death to destroy death. It's just brilliant. It's just checkmate. Jesus didn't overcome sin and death in spite of evil. He overcomes sin and death by leveraging evil against itself. This is amazing. He uses death to destroy death. And after Easter, Peter, he's preaching about this radical redemptive grand reversal. And he says this in Acts chapter 2. Take a look at it. Sure, Jesus died on the cross, but God raised Jesus from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. All right, so what's the point? What's the point of all this? Here it is, guys. God may be behind the scenes in Esther's story, or God might be center stage in Easter's story, but he's always there. God is in control, even if it's covertly in control, in unknown, unnamed, unlikely ways, even in ways that may seem like complete catastrophes in the moment, whether with a royal edict calling for your genocide, or with the Messiah's lifeless body hanging on a Roman cross. I mean, would you just think about how in the moment, each situation, whether it was saying, well, let's hang Mordecai on Haman's super gallows, or whether it was Jesus, the Messiah, being hung on a cross, this super cross, because it was a cross for all humanity. Think about this. In every one of those situations, this seemed to be the worst case scenario to eyewitnesses, like this catastrophic, all is lost, the sky is falling, we're done, it's over, there's no coming back from this tragedy. But then they came to realize something that you just cannot and must not miss. When it comes to God and our hairiest, toughest situations in life, when out of faith and a sense of discovery, we're asking, where's God in all this? Watch this. This is what happens. He may be invisible, but he will always be invincible. Boom, right? It's amazing how a little light can shift your perspective, isn't it? I mean, guys, think about it. This is life. This picture is life. A couple seconds ago, you didn't see these hands, but they were there all along. For the last 35 minutes, these hands were invisible to you, and all you saw was this pain, this crisis, this chaos, this cross, the gallows, this defeat. But these hands, they were there all along. They were ready to shift things at just the right time. These hands of God have been here the entire time, and you just didn't see them. But just because they were not visible did not mean that they were not here, right? Guys, so it is with God and doing life with God. He's there even in the hard stuff. Esther would say, you might not see him or sense him or hear him or feel him, but he's there. Things may look bleak or bad or dark or discouraging, but he's there. Something might even be left for dead, like as dead as a corpse on a cross, but he's there. He's alive and he's powerful. He's always in the middle of your mess, right there. And so here's the big idea, the whole message. Here's this idea that we hope this entire series is driving so deeply into your hearts that you will never forget it. Like a piece of glass in your mind, may you never forget this or be able to shake it loose. Here it is. He may be invisible, but he'll always be invincible. Whether on the gallows, on the cross, in that crisis, in your marriage, with your son or daughter, in your illness, in your financial pressure, in your work, in your career, in your calling, in any situation of your life, no matter what is happening, behind the scenes, God is there. And he's there to bring about his absolute best for you and for us. So where's God in all this? He may be invisible, but he'll always be invincible. And that means that eventually his victory will be visible to everyone. So again, why talk about Esther before Easter? Because Esther was essential for Easter. Because there would be no Easter without Esther. There'd be no Easter unless a brave and courageous young woman 2,500 years ago had boldly and honestly and intentionally asked the question, where's God in all this? And then boldly acted when she found out where he was to save the Jewish people. Without Esther, there would be no Easter. Because without Esther, there would be no Jews. And without the Jews, there would be no Jesus. And without Jesus, there would be no cross. And without the cross, there'd be no resurrection. Without the resurrection, there would be no Easter. So this Easter, I'm not only thanking God for the story of Esther, but I'm also more freely and more often asking this quest-creating super question. Where's God in all this? And we urge you to do so too. So if you come back next week for Easter, we're going to discover how, because of Jesus' invisible but powerful presence in our lives, you can live an invincible life in our post-Easter world. So we hope you'll come back for that. Carl's going to share a message that's going to be incredibly inspiring. But now let me ask you, wherever you are, would you bow your heads and pray with me right now? And King Jesus, we are so grateful to you that you are alive. We're so grateful to you that you are powerful, that you are infinitely wise, that you're infinitely loving. And so no matter what we are facing in our lives right now, would you allow us to be able to realize the power of this truth and really let it sink deep down into not just our minds, but also our hearts, to know that even if we can't see you, you're there. To know that even if you seem invisible, you're going to be invincible no matter what we face. You are for us and you love us. And as we move toward Easter this week, would you just remind us of that at every turn, no matter what happens in the world around us, that you love us and that you're there. We pray this in the name of Jesus. And together, in great faith, all of God's people said, amen.